From the back alleys of New York to the sun-scorched streets of Florida, from prison yards of the South to the hidden corners of the Midwest, America has witnessed the rise of drug gangs that reshaped crime, culture, and entire communities. These organizations were not just street crews, they were armies built on blood, fear, and billions in drug profits. Some ruled through terror, leaving trails of bodies as warnings to rivals and law enforcement alike. Others created vast empires that rivaled multinational corporations, complete with hierarchies, codes of silence, and brutal enforcement squads. They thrived in the shadows of poverty, systemic neglect, and the booming drug trade, carving out territories where their word was law. This is the story of the most ruthless drug gangs in America. Their rise, their reign, and the bloody legacy they left behind. The rise of the Chambers brothers. In the turbulent landscape of 1980s America, when crack cocaine swept through cities like a storm, few names captured the era's chaos and ambition like the Chamber brothers of Detroit, Michigan. The story begins with four brothers, Larry, Willie, Billy, and Otis Chamber, who migrated north from the small town of Marianna, Arkansas, searching for opportunity. But instead of prosperity through honest work, they found themselves drawn into the fast money of Detroit's underground economy. What began as small-scale hustling in the late 1970s would soon grow into one of the most sophisticated crack enterprises of the decade. By the mid-1980s, the crack epidemic had taken hold of Detroit, devastating neighborhoods with addiction and violence. Unlike most drug crews who relied on chaotic street-level distribution, the Chamber brothers introduced something new, an assembly line-style operation. Drawing inspiration from Detroit's automotive industry, they turned abandoned apartment buildings into crack factories. Workers were given specific roles. Some cooked cocaine into crack, others packaged it into vials, and teams of sellers distributed it around the clock. Every task was regimented, every move controlled. This level of organization set the Chambers apart. In a time when most dealers worked in small crews, the Chambers ran their business like a corporation. They were generating tens of thousands of dollars a day, with money flowing in so fast that they had to store it in garbage bags and duffel bags. Their rise symbolized a new kind of drug organization, one that operated more like an industrial enterprise than a street gang. But success bred enemies. The Chambers quickly became targets of both rival dealers and law enforcement. Shootouts and turf wars erupted as their operation expanded beyond Detroit into cities like Flint, Kalamazoo, and Saginaw. Meanwhile, the police watched as the Chambers flaunted their wealth, expensive cars, gold chains, and lavish parties, all financed by the misery of crack addiction. The tipping point came when authorities captured video evidence of their crack houses in operation. Local news famously aired a hidden camera report from inside a Chamber brothers drug den, showing teenagers openly cooking, bagging, and selling crack. The footage shocked the nation, exposing the scale of Detroit's drug crisis and the Chambers' role in fueling it. By 1988, federal and state agencies launched a coordinated crackdown. Raids swept through Detroit, and the Chamber brothers were arrested on charges ranging from drug trafficking to racketeering. Their empire collapsed almost overnight. Convictions sent the brothers to prison, where they received long sentences, marking the end of one of the most notorious drug crews in American history. Yet their legacy endures as a cautionary tale. The Chambers did not simply sell crack, they industrialized it. They applied corporate discipline to the drug trade, showing just how profitable and destructive crack cocaine could be when distributed with precision and scale. The rise and fall of the Chamber brothers remains a chilling chapter in the story of America's war on drugs. An example of how ambition, innovation, and ruthless pursuit of profit reshaped the streets of Detroit forever. The rise of the Shower Posi gang. In the shadowy underworld of the 1980s drug trade, one name struck fear across the Caribbean and the United States: the Shower Posi. Born in the violent streets of Kingston, Jamaica, this crew would grow into one of the most ruthless and influential drug organizations ever to operate on American soil. The Shower Posi traces its roots back to the political violence of Jamaica in the 1970s. Armed street gangs were funded by rival political parties, and the Shower Posi emerged under the leadership of Lester Lloyd Jim Brown Coke, a feared enforcer with deep ties to Jamaican politics. Their name, Shower Posi, came from their brutal tactics. They didn't just kill, they showered their enemies with bullets. By the early 1980s, the gang expanded beyond Kingston, seizing the opportunities created by the crack cocaine epidemic in the United States. Members migrated to Miami, New York, and other major U.S. cities, carrying with them the same violent discipline that made them feared in Jamaica. Unlike many local crews, the Shower Posi had direct connections to Colombian cocaine suppliers and Jamaican marijuana growers, giving them a powerful edge in the rapidly expanding American drug market. In Miami, they battled for control of neighborhoods already ravaged by the cocaine wars of the era. Their reputation for merciless violence made rivals step aside or pay with their lives. From there, the Shower Posi spread northward, establishing strongholds in New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey. In Brooklyn and the Bronx, they clashed with established African American and Hispanic crews, often leaving behind trails of bodies. But the gang's influence wasn't limited to street-level dealing. The Shower Posi became a transnational network, trafficking tons of cocaine and marijuana through U.S. ports and Caribbean smuggling routes. They funneled drug profits back to Jamaica, strengthening their political and criminal power base. By the mid-1980s, they were earning millions of dollars a month, making them one of the richest and deadliest drug crews of the era. Violence was their signature. Law enforcement linked the Shower Posi to hundreds of murders in the United States alone. They intimidated witnesses, executed rivals, and carried out contract killings, making prosecutions incredibly difficult. Their brutality became legendary, even among hardened criminals. The gang's rise drew national attention in the late 1980s, when U.S. authorities began connecting their operations to waves of violence in New York and Miami. Federal investigations revealed that the Shower Posi was more than a street gang. It was a criminal army with international reach. Their members moved drugs, laundered money, and carried out assassinations with military-like precision. By the early 1990s, law enforcement agencies on both sides of the Caribbean targeted the gang. In the U.S., prosecutors launched major federal cases. In Jamaica, the government cracked down after international pressure mounted. Leaders and lieutenants were arrested, and some were extradited to America to face justice. But even as the original Shower Posi faced indictments, the gang's influence never fully disappeared. Their ruthless methods, transnational connections, and role in shaping the U.S. crack era left a lasting mark on organized crime. The rise of the Shower Posi was more than a story of drugs and violence. It was a story of how politics, poverty, and international crime intertwined, creating one of the deadliest crews America had ever seen. The rise of the Junior Black Mafia. In the heart of Philadelphia during the 1980s, as the crack cocaine epidemic swept across America, a new organization rose to prominence, one that combined the ruthlessness of the streets with the structure of organized crime. They called themselves the Junior Black Mafia, or simply JBM. The JBM emerged in 1985, founded by a group of ambitious young men who grew up watching an earlier generation of Philadelphia's Black Mafia dominate the heroin trade in the 1970s. The original Black Mafia had been broken by law enforcement, but their legacy, fear, discipline, and a code of loyalty remained. The JBM saw themselves as successors, a junior version that would claim the crack market exploding across Philadelphia. From the start, the JBM operated differently from most street crews. They weren't just a gang, they were an organization modeled after the Mafia itself. They structured themselves with bosses, lieutenants, soldiers, and enforcers. Members wore black and gold sweatsuits, a uniform that marked their identity and their dominance over Philadelphia's drug corners. Their image was as important as their firepower, and the JBM cultivated a reputation for being both disciplined and deadly. The crew quickly seized control of West Philadelphia, North Philly, and South Philly, setting up crack houses and street-level operations that pulled in millions of dollars. Unlike fragmented neighborhood dealers, the JBM centralized power. Independent hustlers were given a choice: join the organization, pay tribute, or be eliminated. Many chose to fall in line. Those who resisted were met with violence, drive-by shootings, public executions, and intimidation campaigns that left entire neighborhoods under their control. By the late 1980s, the JBM had become the most powerful black drug crew in Philadelphia. Their influence extended beyond the streets. They moved cocaine in bulk, maintained ties with suppliers, and laundered profits through local businesses. They also became known for their connections to hip-hop culture, using music, nightclubs, and flashy lifestyles to reinforce their image as both feared gangsters and neighborhood icons. But what truly set the JBM apart was their emphasis on unity and discipline. Members were expected to follow orders with military-like precision. Meetings were held regularly. Rules were enforced without compromise. In a city plagued by fragmented street gangs, the JBM presented itself as a single, unified army, a junior mafia rising out of Philadelphia's drug war. Their rise did not go unnoticed. The JBM's violent enforcement of its empire brought them into direct conflict with rival crews like the Junior Black Incorporated and smaller neighborhood-based dealers who refused to submit. These wars left dozens dead and solidified the JBM's reputation as one of the most dangerous drug crews in the country. By the dawn of the 1990s, the Junior Black Mafia stood at its peak, controlling vast sections of Philadelphia's crack trade, feared by rivals and targeted by police. Their rise was meteoric, a symbol of how quickly the crack epidemic could transform a crew of young hustlers into a powerful criminal empire. The JBM story is one of ambition, organization, and ruthless violence. It is the story of a new generation of Philadelphia gangsters who believed they could build a lasting empire on the ashes of the old Black Mafia, an empire built on crack cocaine, discipline, and fear. The rise of the Miami Boys. In the mid-1980s, as crack cocaine began to dominate the American drug trade, a new crew emerged from the streets of Miami, Florida, that would change the landscape of the South. They were called the Miami Boys, a violent, disciplined, and highly organized group that brought the chaos of the cocaine wars northward into Atlanta and beyond. The Miami Boys were born in the crucible of Miami's cocaine underworld. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Miami became ground zero for the Colombian cocaine pipeline, and the young men who would later form the crew learned the trade in an environment already saturated with guns, drugs, and easy money. Unlike many local street dealers, the Miami Boys had direct connections to major suppliers, giving them both access to large quantities of cocaine and the ambition to expand their market. Their opportunity came in the early 1980s when they migrated to Atlanta, Georgia. At the time, Atlanta was not yet the drug hub it would later become. Local dealers were small-time, selling marijuana or powder cocaine in limited quantities. The Miami Boys brought something new and devastating: crack cocaine, packaged cheap, potent, and addictive. Almost overnight, they transformed Atlanta's drug economy. The crew operated with a level of organization rarely seen in street-level drug gangs. They set up crack houses across the city, staffed with cooks, sellers, and enforcers. They wore distinctive black hats and clothing, signaling their identity and control of territory. Their brand of crack was consistent, Their prices undercut the competition, and their violence made sure no one dared interfere. As their profits soared, the Miami Boys expanded into smaller southern cities, from Columbus, Georgia, to Birmingham, Alabama, and Jackson, Mississippi. In each city, the pattern was the same: move in, overwhelm the local dealers with supply, and eliminate resistance through intimidation or outright murder. Their reputation for ruthlessness spread quickly. Law enforcement and rival gangs alike learned that crossing the Miami Boys often ended in a hail of gunfire. By the late 1980s, the crew had become infamous, not only for their control of the crack trade, but also for their militaristic approach to discipline. Members who disobeyed orders faced brutal consequences. This combination of corporate-style organization and uncompromising violence made the Miami Boys one of the most feared drug crews in the South. But with their rise came scrutiny. Atlanta police and federal agencies soon identified the Miami Boys as the driving force behind the city's exploding crack epidemic. Raids on crack houses uncovered caches of automatic weapons, thousands of vials of crack, and enormous sums of cash. Shootouts between the Miami Boys and law enforcement became frequent, leaving neighborhoods terrorized and fueling calls for a federal crackdown. Still, for a time, the Miami Boys thrived. They represented the new face of drug crews in America: mobile, ruthless, and entrepreneurial. Their rise was fueled by the perfect storm of crack cocaine's profitability, cartel connections, and the absence of organized competition in the South. The story of the Miami Boys is not just about drugs. It's about how a crew from the streets of Miami carried the lessons of one cocaine war into the heart of the American South, and in the process, built one of the most notorious drug organizations of the crack era. The rise of the Supreme Team. In the unforgiving streets of South Jamaica, Queens, during the 1980s crack epidemic, a new force rose from the housing projects, an organization that would become one of the most feared and notorious drug crews in New York City. They were known as the Supreme Team, led by the ruthless and charismatic Kenneth Supreme McGriff. The story begins in the Baisley Park houses, where McGriff and his childhood friends saw opportunity in the growing demand for cocaine. In the early 1980s, as crack cocaine hit New York like a tidal wave, Supreme recognized what few others did. This was more than a hustle. This was an empire in the making. Unlike smaller neighborhood dealers, Supreme envisioned a structured drug organization, one that operated with military-like discipline. Inspired by the Italian Mafia, he created a hierarchy of bosses, lieutenants, and street-level soldiers. Members of the crew wore matching red jackets, hats, and sweatshirts, a uniform of power and loyalty that sent a clear message. The Supreme Team controlled the blocks of South Jamaica. Their system was efficient and ruthless. Cocaine was purchased in bulk, cooked into crack, and distributed through a network of 24-hour drug spots staffed by shifts of workers. The Supreme Team didn't just sell drugs, they ran their operation like a corporation. They had rules, structure, and codes of conduct. Loyalty was rewarded. Betrayal was punished with swift and public violence. At its peak, the Supreme Team was generating millions of dollars every week. Their control over Queens was absolute, and their influence spread into other boroughs. They invested their money in flashy cars, jewelry, and nightclubs, projecting an image of power that inspired fear and admiration in equal measure. For many young men in the projects, joining the Supreme Team was not just about money, it was about identity, belonging, and respect. But their rise was paved with blood. Rivals who resisted were eliminated. Independent dealers were given a choice: work for the team or face execution. Shootouts in Queens became common, and the Supreme Team's reputation for extreme violence only grew. Witnesses refused to testify against them, terrified of retaliation. Their organization also had political connections, with whispers that local leaders turned a blind eye to their activities. This aura of invincibility made them legends in the crack era and their story became synonymous with the violent transformation of New York's drug trade in the 1980s. By the late 1980s, the Supreme Team had reached its height, controlling vast swaths of the crack market in Queens and pulling in untold fortunes. They were no longer just a crew. They were a criminal dynasty, born from the streets, hardened by violence, and united under one man's vision of power. The rise of the Supreme Team was more than the story of a drug crew. It was the story of how the crack epidemic transformed entire communities, creating empires of crime where once there had been only hustlers. And at the center of it all stood Kenneth Supreme McGriff, a man whose dream of building an empire would make him one of the most infamous drug lords in New York City history. The rise of Rafel Edmund's drug crew. In the 1980s, Washington, D.C., a city already grappling with poverty and social unrest, became the epicenter of one of the most notorious crack cocaine operations in the United States. At the center of it all was Rafel Edmund III, a young man who would transform from a street hustler into a kingpin whose influence reached far beyond the nation's capital. Born and raised in Southeast D.C., Rafel Edmund grew up amid violence and limited opportunity. By his late teens, he had learned the ins and outs of the city's underground economy, starting with small-scale drug dealing. But Edmund had a vision unlike most street-level dealers. He wanted control, total control, over the city's drug trade. He didn't just want to sell drugs, he wanted to build an empire. In the early 1980s, as crack cocaine began to flood American cities, Edmund saw an opportunity. Unlike powder cocaine, which was largely the domain of elite traffickers, crack could be sold in small, affordable doses, creating a rapidly expanding consumer market. Edmund and his crew capitalized on this trend, taking a piece of the lucrative market for themselves. What set Rafel Edmund apart from other dealers was his organization and ambition. He recruited the best and most loyal young men he could find, creating a hierarchical system of lieutenants, street-level sellers, and enforcers. His crews were well-armed and disciplined, prepared to defend their turf at all costs. Violence was a tool to maintain control, but Edmund also understood business. He emphasized consistency, reliability, and loyalty among his dealers, ensuring that the operation ran efficiently and profitably. By the mid-1980s, Rafel Edmund's influence extended across Southeast D.C., controlling virtually all crack distribution in the area. His operation was no longer a simple street-level enterprise. It had become a multi-million-dollar network. Through his connections with Colombian cocaine suppliers, Edmund secured large shipments of high-quality cocaine, which were then converted into crack and sold across the city. The scale of Edmund's operation was unprecedented. Neighborhoods that once saw sporadic drug sales were now dominated by his crews, with 24-hour crack houses, organized shifts of sellers, and armed guards protecting shipments. His success attracted both admirers and enemies, igniting violent turf wars with rival crews who tried to challenge his dominance. Edmund's willingness to use extreme violence made him a feared figure, both on the streets and among law enforcement. By the late 1980s, the name Rafel Edmund was synonymous with D.C.'s crack epidemic. He had turned a local street operation into a citywide empire, generating millions of dollars per week. His influence extended beyond the streets. His lifestyle, flashy displays of wealth, and strategic cunning made him a symbol of the crack era, a kingpin whose rise defined a generation. The rise of Rafel Edmund's drug crew was a story of ambition, organization, and ruthless enforcement. In just a few short years, he transformed Southeast D.C. into his kingdom, demonstrating how one determined and disciplined individual could dominate a city's drug trade and leave a lasting mark on American criminal history. The rise of the Black Mafia family. In the late 1980s, amid the rise of crack cocaine across America, two brothers from Detroit, Michigan, would build one of the most powerful drug empires in U.S. history. Their names were Demetrius Big Meech Flenory and Terry Southwest T. Flenory. and the organization they created would become infamous as the Black Mafia family, or BMF. The Flannery brothers grew up in Detroit's rough neighborhoods, where poverty, crime, and limited opportunities shaped their ambitions. From an early age, they understood that survival and success meant navigating the streets with cunning and ruthlessness. By the late 1980s, as crack cocaine exploded across Detroit, they recognized an opportunity. Unlike smaller crews, they envisioned something far larger, a nationwide cocaine distribution network built on discipline, loyalty, and a corporate-style hierarchy. BMF began in Detroit's neighborhoods, controlling street-level distribution with precision. Every member had a role, some managed supply, others handled security, and a select few oversaw cash flow. Violence was never senseless. It was a tool to enforce discipline and maintain territory. This structure allowed the Flanneries to scale their operations quickly, ensuring that the streets were both productive and profitable. By the mid-1990s, BMF had expanded far beyond Detroit. Atlanta became a key hub thanks to its strategic location and growing drug market. From there, the brothers' influence spread to Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, and other major cities, turning BMF into a multi-state powerhouse. Their crews moved cocaine in bulk, often supplied directly by Mexican cartels, and coordinated sales with military-style efficiency. What set BMF apart from other street crews was their ability to blend criminal enterprise with legitimate business. The brothers invested in nightclubs, music promotion, and entertainment ventures, creating a glamorous front that masked their illegal operations. This fusion of crime and culture helped them build influence in both street and celebrity circles, attracting attention and envy from rivals and law enforcement alike. Violence remained a cornerstone of their control. Rival crews, uncooperative distributors, or anyone who threatened BMF's expansion were met with swift retribution. But unlike other crews, BMF's strategy relied equally on intimidation, negotiation, and discipline, making them more sustainable and more dangerous than most street gangs. By the early 2000s, the Black Mafia family had achieved national notoriety. Millions of dollars flowed through their hands each month. Their brand became synonymous with power, wealth, and danger, earning them a fearsome reputation in urban America. Yet their visibility also drew attention from federal authorities, who began monitoring their operations with increasing intensity. The rise of BMF was a story of ambition, vision, and ruthlessness. Big Meech and Southwest T transformed a Detroit street crew into a nationwide cocaine empire, combining criminal cunning with strategic organization. Their influence reshaped the American drug trade, proving that a disciplined crew operating with business acumen and raw violence could rival even the most entrenched criminal organizations. The Black Mafia family was no ordinary street gang. It was a criminal dynasty in the making, a testament to the power, danger, and allure of America's drug underworld.